Everyone says work harder, but no one tells you that the real secret is to... Okay, so this is the final episode of a series of 3, where in the first episode, linked above, I discussed how to break down your goals step by step from the end goal backwards, where you'll be asking yourself how and what you must have had to have done to get to that top step, and you keep going. And then in my second video, also linked above, I discussed how to make sure that the goal you've picked is a goal which you actually want by constantly asking yourself why you've picked that goal and then continually breaking it down step by step. So watch those videos if you haven't already. So in this final episode, I'll be going through the re-evaluation stage of goal setting and execution. So what does that actually mean, this re-evaluation stage? Well, assuming that you already have your end goal and you've got these steps in place for that, you need to have a process to ensure that you are hitting and reaching those goals as efficiently as possible. So what we're going to do here is every week or so, at the end of that period, you're going to analyze exactly what you've done in that period towards hitting that next step in your goal list. And the reasons for doing this are as follows. Well, firstly, it helps keep yourself honest and also helps you be productive. As I mentioned in my previous videos, you want to ideally have put a time frame in place for these goals. And the short-term goals really should be broken down into weekly tasks. So after a week, when you're doing the reevaluation, you will know if you're making sufficient progress towards that first short-term goal. Without this technique, it is far too easy for weeks and months to go past with you actually making minimal progress. Now, don't get me wrong, you won't always be 100% productive and efficient, but I'd much rather find that out after a week or so than instead 6 months down the line doing this self-analysis and realizing, I've been doing not enough. Find it out after 1 week. And just for the record, I personally make my short-term goals actually daily. So I have something tangible that I know I can get ticked off at the end of every single day. So I wake up, I'll write down a list first thing in the morning of what I want to get done that day towards my end goals, and I'll make sure they're done and finished by the end of that day. Okay, so the second and probably most important reason for doing this self-evaluation is to ensure that what you're doing in that week is actually helping you head towards that end goal of yours. And this is probably the most common area that people get wrong, because they simply haven't broken down their short-term goals into small enough executable tasks. And with that next step therefore being far too vague, you end up actually doing the wrong things and not approaching that next goal. And this scenario at first glance is actually quite hard to spot, because this kind of individual isn't being lazy. They're probably working very hard, doing long hours, being productive. People probably going, complete workaholic, that person. They'll be thinking to themselves, wow, great day's work, done my 12 hours plus, I'm making progress, I'm smashing and reaching my goal. When actually, just because you're working hard and long hours doesn't always actually mean you are approaching that next goal of yours. And look, here are 2 examples of what I'm talking about. So in this first example, it was a few years back now, and there was this kind of distant family friend of ours who had a son. And this person had just finished uni, so roughly 21 years old, and they're looking to apply for jobs. And I forget the exact jobs they're applying for, but let's just say for this example that it was some app developer, okay? And what happened was this individual was going, right, I'm going to now learn these skills because I need them for these jobs. And let's just say that they were doing something called Android Studio apps and Java. They thought that was what was required. And this individual ended up doing, I think, 3 or 4, perhaps more months of learning this stuff, I think from YouTube, maybe a few courses too. And when they thought they were ready and they looked for actual jobs, what happened there was they looked at the descriptions and requirements, and turns out what they just learned, although nice stuff, wasn't actually what's required by these jobs nowadays. So essentially, all of those 4 or 5 months was not helping him reach that next goal of his, to get a job. And like I mentioned previously, it wasn't as if he was being lazy and not trying to work at this. He was working very hard, but simply didn't have it all broken down properly to know what is the next actual actions for that end goal. Now, in this scenario, I think the individual ended up being fine because he just spent 3 or 4 more months doing that other stuff and then it was fine. But the point here is, not everyone will have that cushion. What if you can't afford to make that mistake because you haven't got 3 or 4 months of extra time to spend doing something? So it's really important you don't make that mistake. So how could that have been avoided, this scenario? Well, if they'd followed what my first video was on about the hows, you'd go, right, what's the end goal here? The end goal was to get a job in this app development companies. So the next step would be, how do you get those roles? And the answer would be, well, you need to have the required skill set. The next step would be, how or what are the skill sets for those jobs, of which, of course, then the answer should be, well, you look on those job specs and find what it is. At that point, he might say, it was learning React Native. Let's say it was that. And then at that point, you then go, well, how do I learn that? We'll find maybe this course. And you go on from there. So hopefully you can see there how it's imperative that you do this reevaluation. And as I mentioned before, fact checking. In that scenario, the fact was wrong. They thought that learning this stuff was the correct stuff. It just wasn't. So fact check and reevaluate to hit your goals. But the last important reason for this reevaluation is for these scenarios where you're still working long hours and working hard, but what you've done could have been done in a fraction of the time. So essentially, you're just wasting time. So here's an example of this. In my years in teaching, I would see many different teachers in various different subjects. They spend lots of time, say, making brand new worksheets, brand new PowerPoints, make it all nice and lovely, put little diagrams in there, little drawings, making it look fantastic. Even sometimes redoing their previous worksheets. But here's the thing. Almost all of these scenarios here, they could have just used online resources or textbooks or many other things which already exist and to a very, very, very high level, often potentially higher than the level that the person himself could create themselves. Or it could be that this nice neatness doesn't actually lead to much more learning for those students. So in this scenario here, all these individuals might have different end goals, but what's hopefully quite transparent is that that long, arduous task of making these worksheets isn't being the most efficient way of hitting the end goals. Let's say the end goal was making your students get the highest grades. Well, you wasting time doing this wasn't helping that, and could have been spent better doing other things. Let's say your end goal was a personal one outside of work to do your own stuff. Well, now you're wasting time doing work stuff, which could have been done in half the time. So hopefully you can see here, this scenario is one where people are simply wasting time when time is limited. So, breaking down these two scenarios, when at the end of your week and you're doing your own reevaluation, you need to ask yourself, from what I've done that week, A, was it actually needed? Was it relevant? And B, could I have done that a lot more efficiently? And remember, just because you're busy does not mean you're being proactive and heading towards your end goals. Don't just arbitrarily make yourself busy for nothing. You may have heard of the phrase, work smarter, not harder. But I take that actually with a pinch of salt, because it's very easy to hear that phrase and go, well, brilliant. If I'm sneaky and being smart here, I can work a lot fewer hours and get the same amount done. So I've saved time, hooray. And although that's true, I think it's the wrong mindset. If you're switched on and you've worked out how to work smarter, then why not work smarter and work harder to get properly ahead? And this way you'll properly destroy the competition, if that's what you want. It's just a different mindset between one person who wants to, by being smarter, save time, and then someone else who has the frame of mind of, I want to be better and get ahead of everyone else. But everyone else is already working extremely hard and maxing out. And more importantly, they want to beat me. So therefore, to properly win here, I need to put in as many hours as the competition, but also be smarter. So you can therefore get the output be much higher than them. So, in a nutshell, hopefully you can see now that by doing this re-evaluation task, you can make sure that A, you're putting in enough hours and effort towards your end goal, that B, what you're doing is actually the right thing to head towards that end goal and not some nonsense, and C, that you are being as efficient as possible. And finally, just remember, Your goals may change as the years go by. So by doing this re-evaluation, you can tinker with stuff to make it more aligned with what you actually want now. And that, of course, will involve doing what I've discussed in other videos about breaking down the why you want that end goal and the hows. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button and bell notification. Feel free to leave any comments and any suggestions for future content. And as ever, onwards and upwards.